I kept the peace at every cost. In my family, I was known as the one who kept things together. This was not a title anyone gave me formally. It was a role I had grown into over years, confirmed by repetition, until it was simply what I was. When my mother and my brother argued, and they argued regularly, about money, about expectations, about old grievances that had never been fully resolved, I was the one who moved between them. Translating. Softening. Finding the framing that would let both of them feel heard without either of them having to concede. I was good at it. That is not false modesty in reverse, I genuinely was skilled at the management of other people's tension. I could read a room, identify the point of fracture, and redirect before the fracture widened into something harder to repair. The family functioned. Gatherings were possible. Relationships that might otherwise have become estranged remained, if not close, at least navigable. What I had not examined, for a long time, was what the management was costing me personally. My brother Leo is 4 years younger than me. The conflict between him and my mother had been present since his adolescence, a long argument about the shape of his choices, her expectations, and the distance between them. I had been standing in that gap for over a decade. Explaining him to her, contextualizing her to him, absorbing the frustration that neither of them fully expressed to each other because I was present to receive it. There were things I thought about Leo that I had never said to him. Genuine observations, not hostility, but the kind of honest assessment you can only offer someone you know well. I thought he was avoiding a specific reckoning with his finances that was going to cost him later. I thought some of his grievances toward our mother were legitimate and some were inherited habit, the continuation of a posture that had served him at 17 and that he hadn't yet examined at 30. I had thought these things for years. I had said none of them. Because saying them would have disrupted the equilibrium I had worked to maintain. Because my role, the role I had accepted and in some sense built an identity around, was the neutral party. The bridge. Bridges do not take sides. The cost of neutrality, maintained over years, is the gradual disappearance of your own position. You become so accustomed to holding space for others' views that you lose access to your own. Not permanently, the views are still there, still forming. But they have no outlet. They exist internally and go nowhere, which over time creates a specific kind of pressure that I would describe as not quite resentment and not quite sadness. Something in between. A flatness. A sense of being present in the room while also, somehow, not quite there. What I eventually understood, and what took longer to understand than I would have expected, is that keeping the peace and suppressing my own signal are the same action described from 2 different angles. When I stayed neutral to preserve the family's equilibrium, I was making a real choice about whose needs the equilibrium would serve. It would serve my mother's need for surface calm. It would serve Leo's need to not be challenged. It would serve the family's collective preference for the appearance of functioning. My own need, to be seen, to have my observations heard, to exist in the dynamic as a participant rather than a mechanism, was the one that was being traded away to fund all of it. This is the mechanism. The peacekeeper in a family system is not a neutral role. It is a load-bearing role. One person is carrying the structural weight of the entire system's stability, and the cost of that carrying is that person's own presence in the room. The stability looks collective because it is visible across everyone's experience, but the price is localized. One person is paying it. And because that person has chosen the role and often takes some satisfaction from it, the competence, the sense of being needed, the confirmation that you are the reliable one, the paying can go on for a very long time before it becomes visible as loss. There was an evening, a few years ago, when I told Leo something I had been holding for several years. Not angrily, I was not in a state of accumulated resentment by that point, or at least I had worked to move through most of it before the conversation. I told him, plainly, what I observed about the financial pattern and what I thought it was producing. I told him which of his complaints about our mother I thought were worth carrying and which I thought he had outgrown the reasons for. I did not manage the delivery toward what he would receive well. I delivered what I actually thought. He was quiet for a long time after. Then he said something I did not expect. He said he had been waiting for me to say something like that for years. That my consistent neutrality had read to him, at some level, as indifference. As if I didn't have a view because I didn't care enough to form one. I had been managing his experience of family conflict for a decade, and he had experienced the management as absence. This was not the interpretation I had been operating under. The interpretation I had been operating under was that I was protecting him, protecting both of them, from a harder version of the dynamic. But the protection had looked, from where he was standing, like I wasn't really there. The peace I had kept was real. The gatherings had been possible in a way they might not have been without the management. I don't fully discount that. But the peace had been purchased at a price that I alone paid, and that purchase had made me less present, less actually there, in the relationships I was ostensibly holding together. What changed was a gradual permission, extended to myself, to have a position. To say what I observed. To stop requiring my own neutrality as the precondition for the family's function. This did not destroy the equilibrium, or rather, when it disturbed the equilibrium that reformed was different, and in some ways more honest. Leo and my mother still have friction. I am still sometimes the one who navigates between them. But I navigate now as a participant, with my own view present in the room, not as a mechanism that has agreed to have no view in exchange for keeping the peace. The peace was always a temporary condition anyway. It did not require my disappearance to hold. I just believed that it did, for long enough that the believing had become indistinguishable from fact. The stability of a system built on one person's silence is not stability. It is the appearance of it, maintained at a cost that only one person is paying. And that person is almost always the one who is most willing to pay. Here is what I carry forward from this, and what I hope might be useful if you recognize any part of your own story in mine. The pattern I described does not operate because we are careless or unintelligent or unaware. It operates because it has a function, because it is doing something for us that we have not found another way to do. Staying in the wrong situation, staying silent when we should speak, not walking away when the door is right there, all of these behaviors persist because they are solving something, even if imperfectly. They are providing some version of comfort or protection or identity that we have not yet found a better way to provide. Understanding that function is the first move. Not judging the behavior, but asking honestly, what is this doing for me? What would I have to give up if I stopped? What am I afraid will happen if I make the change I know I need to make? Those questions do not dissolve the pattern automatically. But they make it visible in a new way. And visibility changes the relationship to the thing. When you can see what something is doing, you can start to choose whether you want it to keep doing it. The change that followed was not easier because I understood the mechanism. It was the same difficulty. But I went into it knowing what I was moving through rather than being entirely inside it without perspective. That perspective is what I want to pass on here. Not the specific story. The structure. The shape of how we stay in things longer than we should, how we look away from things we can see, how we tell ourselves the thing will change without giving it a mechanism for changing. You are not alone in this. It is not a character flaw. It is how the human nervous system manages uncertainty and fear. But you can do something different. The doing starts with the looking. Look at it. Directly. Honestly. Without the story that makes it easier to carry. And then decide what you want to do with what you see. That decision, fully conscious and fully yours, is the only kind that actually changes anything. There is also something I want to say about the specific moment of turning toward rather than away, the moment when you actually do the thing you have been not doing. Because that moment has a texture that I was not prepared for, and that I think is worth naming so you know what to expect when you reach it. It does not feel like relief. Not at first. The moment of change, of finally having the conversation, or walking away, or saying the thing, or making the decision, often feels worse before it feels better. There is a period of acute discomfort in which the old equilibrium has been disturbed but the new one has not yet settled. You have stopped managing the avoidance, which means the thing you were avoiding is now fully present, no longer softened by distance. That period is real and it is temporary. I want to say both of those things with equal emphasis. It is real, do not be surprised by it, do not mistake it for evidence that you made the wrong choice. And it is temporary, it has a duration, and that duration is almost always shorter than the years of management that preceded it. The other side of that period is different. Not perfect, change does not produce perfection. But different in the specific way of someone who has stopped spending energy on maintaining something and can now spend that energy somewhere else. The ambient cost disappears. The weight that you had normalized as simply the weight of life turns out to have been specific and removable. I have felt that release more than once. Each time it is instructive about how much I had been carrying that I didn't know I was carrying. You probably know what you're carrying. You just haven't decided to put it down yet. When you decide, it will be hard first and better after. That is almost always the order of things. And the better, when it arrives, is real. What I notice now, in the life I have after the story I told here, is a kind of attentiveness I didn't have before. Not anxiety, that's different. Anxiety is looking for the thing that might go wrong. What I have is more like a quiet, ongoing check-in. Am I here because I want to be? Am I saying what I actually think? Am I moving toward what matters or managing around something I haven't named? These questions don't produce constant disruption. Most of the time the answer is, yes, I am where I want to be, saying what I think, moving in the right direction. The check-in confirms what I thought. And that confirmation is itself valuable. It builds a different relationship with my own choices. They feel more like choices and less like things happening to me. On the occasions when the answer is different, when the check-in reveals an avoidance or a suppression or a staying too long, I try to act on the information faster than I used to. Not immediately, not impulsively. But without the elaborate deferral structure. Without the "I'll address this when the conditions are better." The conditions will not be better. They will be different. Different is workable. Better is a fiction. I am the only condition that changes. And I change through the practice of looking and then acting on what I see. That's the whole thing. The looking and the acting. Over and over. For as long as it takes. Which is your whole life. But a whole life spent actually inside it is worth more than a whole life spent at the edge of it, managing the view. I know which one I want. I think you do too.